Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Roman and I'm going to be reading to you a story from the Big Golden Book of Fairy Tales. This book was retold by Lorne Leete-Hodge and illustrated by Beverlie Manson. The story that we're going to be reading is The Ugly Duckling. It was a lovely summer day, and a soft breeze stirred the clump of weeds that grew by the pond. The large white duck, sitting on a clutch of eggs, stretched herself, shook out her feathers, and then settled herself once more onto her nest. Hatching eggs was a long business, and she seemed to have been sitting there forever. The rest of the farm was quiet. A few bees busied themselves among the flower beds. Some hens scratched about in the dust, not really looking for anything, and the old donkey blinked in the sunlight by the fence. The cow stood in silence, munching the lush grass, and the farm cat lay on the cobbles, letting the sun's rays warm him. Most of the ducks were swimming on the pond, and no one bothered to go and talk to the duck sitting all alone on her nest. She looked across and heard them quacking and splashing, and longed to join them. It should not be long now, but she did wish the ducklings would hurry and hatch out. And would you believe it? Just then they began to crack the eggs that had been their home for so long. Quack, quack! First one, then another. The fluffy little babies staggered out onto the grass, blinking a little in the bright sunlight. The mother duck was very pleased with her broad 6 yellow ducklings, the prettiest she had ever seen. She turned and began to kick the broken eggshells from the nest when she noticed there was one egg left. It was a large one, so maybe it took longer to hatch. Warily, she sat down again and covered it with the soft down of her body. She watched the other ducklings as they waddled in the sunshine. "Don't go too far away," she told them. Just then, another duck waddled up to talk to her. "Oh, I see the ducklings have hatched out," she said, looking at them. "Fine little ones, aren't they? Why are you still sitting there?" "There is one egg left," said Mother Duck, getting up to show her. "It's bigger than the rest." "I should leave it," said her friend. "It looks more like a turkey's egg than a duck's." "Oh, I can't leave my last egg. I'm sure it won't take long," said Mother Duck, and she settled herself once more on the nest. She had not long to wait when a louder quack than the others, a gray, ugly scrap pushed its way out of the egg and frowned in the sunlight. It shook itself and looked around. "My, you are ugly," said Mother Duck. "Still, it can't be helped. Come along and meet your brothers and sisters. Then we must go to the pond." Quacking and pushing, the other ducklings crowded round their new brother. "Isn't he awful?" they cried, pecking at him. Soon the poor little duck was hiding to keep away from their sharp beaks. "Come along now," said Mother Duck. "Enough of that. Isn't time for a swim?" And she led the way to the pond, the ducklings behind her one after the other, with the odd little gray one last of all. The water felt cool, and soon Mother Duck and her brood were happily swimming around it. She looked at her youngest. "Oh, well, he's certainly not a turkey, that's for sure," she said. "He swims too well." At last she called them together, and one by one they followed her to the farmyard to pay their respects to the queen of the farmyard. This was a very old, very large duck who, as befitting her special position, wore a red rag around her leg. All the other ducks were scared of her, and she sat near the water's edge, her quick eyes missing nothing all day long. Her word was law among the ducks. "I've brought the children to meet you," said Mother Duck, pushing them forward. "What's this one, then?" quacked the old duck, looking at the little gray one huddling in the back. "He was the last of the hatch," said Mother Duck. "He was so long in the egg, I expect it made him a bit droopy." "Huh!" the old quack to herself. "Funny sort of duck, if you ask me." And she glided onto the cool water for a swim. Soon all the other ducklings and chickens in the farmyard began to tease the ugly duckling, pecking at him and chasing him away. The old farm cat hissed at him, and the poor little bird ran away to dodge his claws. At last he could bear it no longer and flew over the hedge into the next field, all the little sparrows and starlings flying up in fear as he passed. "Oh dear, even other birds are frightened," he said to himself. "I must be the ugliest bird in the whole world." He found himself on the edge of a large lake. Up in the sky, some large ducks with pretty colored markings flew and squawked. When they saw him, they flew down and looked at the stranger who had come to their lake. "Who are you?" they asked, poking him this way and that with their beaks. "Oh, don't send me away," he begged. "Just let me hide here for a little while." So they left him alone, and he watched them swirling and flying high in the blue sky. Suddenly, a loud bang frightened him. Then another and another, and two of the beautiful ducks fell to the ground near him. One more landed in the water with a loud splash, and soon the lake was red. The little duck looked on in horror. What was happening? There was a crash and the sound of breaking twigs. Then a large black dog came through the weeds towards him. The little duck quivered with fright, but the dog looked at him and turned and ran away. "Ugh, even a dog is scared of my ugly face," said the little duck. The banging went on until he could hear it no more, and he flew away over the hedge. At last he came to a tiny cottage by the side of a wood. It was very old, with a crooked chimney and a topsy-turvy roof. In the doorway stood a very old woman with a black cat. In the garden, a small brown hen clucked and scratched in the dust. The little duck, tired and panting from his flight, came up to the cottage. "May I come in?" he asked timidly, and the old woman pushed open the door for him. He sat in a corner, watching as he fed the cat and the hen. "Do you lay eggs?" the old woman asked, and he shook his head. "Can you purr like me?" asked the cat, and again he shook his head. "So you are no use at all," said the cat, and began to chase him from the cottage. The hen pecked at him, and then the old woman, cross at all the noise, shooted him all out onto the garden. The little duck ran as fast as his legs could carry him. So a lonely life began for the little duckling. No one would speak to him, so he hid by the lake all by himself. He swam on the clear water. He divvied up to the bottom, but the fish were too quick for him. He tried hard to make friends with the other creatures round the shore, but he was so ugly that no one wanted anything to do with him. The days passed. The lazy, warm days of summer turned cool, and the autumn came. The leaves on the trees turned yellow, then brown and dry, until teased by the wind they fell, making a scrunchy carpet on the ground. Some days the wind tossed them hither and there, making the branches dance, and the little duck watched them in delight. They looked so pretty in the pale sunlight. But winter was coming. The sky was heavy with rain, and the old raven on the fence shook its feathers and shivered. The cold night air was eating onto his bones. One evening, the little duck heard a strange noise. High above him, some large and beautiful birds were flying across the lake. He had never seen anything so majestic. They were shining white and had long, slender necks that stretched in front of them as they flew. Their cries sounded wild, as with their great wings extended, they flew overhead, away to a warmer land across the sea. The little duck felt a sudden happiness. There was something so beautiful about those birds, and it was as if their cries had been for him. He quivered with excitement. How he would like to join them. If only he could fly away with them. The winter came with a heavy fall of snow. The ice on the lake tingled and froze, and the little duck kept swimming and swimming to keep warm. Then one day, all the water had frozen, and he could not swim. He huddled in the weeds, too cold to move, and at last his feet froze in the ice. A farmer passing by noticed his plight. "Why, you poor frozen little mite," he said, and he picked up the little duck to take home to his children. The The warmth of the big kitchen thawed out the tiny body, and the little duck flapped his wings. It was so good to feel such heat. The farmer's children wanted to play with him, but he was frightened of them and flew up in a panic. He knocked over a bowl of milk, which ran out in a white stream across the floor. The farmer's wife clapped her hands, and the little duck jumped onto the flour bin in terror. The children laughed. The woman shouted, and the duck flew out and into the butter. What a mess he was in! There was noise and bustle everywhere, with the children shrieking, the farmer's wife clapping her hands, and the little duck sticky with flour and butter. When the door opened, he ran out into the garden and kept running until he found a quiet place in the soft snow. The winter was long and hard, and the poor little duck was cold, lonely, and very sad. Somehow, he managed to find food, but he was shivering in the woods, and very often there was not much to eat. At last, the snow melted and the ice dissolved into clear, sparkling water, and he felt the sun on his back. Spring was here at last. He tried his wings and found they were stronger. He soared high into the air, higher and faster. He felt free and alive. On and on he flew until he came to a large garden near an old gray stoned house. It had pretty flowers and soft green lawns with a large shining lake. Then he saw a magical sight. 3 graceful swans came gliding down to the lake towards the house. How majestic they looked! The little duck looked at them. How proud and fine they were. He made up his mind. I will fly over to see these proud birds, he said to himself, and they will peck me, and that will be the end. It is better to die with birds like these than to live alone and unwanted. And I don't want to live through another cold winter like the last one. Bravely he flew over to the lake and on towards the magnificent white birds. They saw him and flew towards him. He had a wonderful surprise. Instead of the ugly gray swan, he blinked and he looked again. It was true. He was a swan. The beautiful birds crowded around him, laughing and talking. Where have you come from? They asked, welcoming him. Where have you been all the winter? Just then, some children came into the park to feed the swans. Look, Mommy, they called. There's a new swan. Isn't he lovely? He's the most beautiful swan I have ever seen, said a little girl, and threw him a large piece of bread. The older swans laughed and nodded their necks in agreement. You are the most beautiful swan we have ever seen, they said. Will you come and live here with us? The little swan, who had always thought he was an ugly duckling, felt his heart would burst with pride. All his dreams had come true, and he was a magnificent swan. At last, he was with his own kind, and no one would ever call him ugly again.